beautifuls, welcome back to my channel. I'm Gahoso, but some call me Gahonina with the cuteness Matswako Minaj. And this is
Sacha from Queer X Talks.
And together, Sobabili times 2. We're the baddest in the school, the baddest in the game, the baddest with the bar, in our own lanes. And this, oh darling, this is Queer Talks. Now listen, you guys did not get a video last week because a lot happened, right? As you might know, your girl went for surgery. But we're not going to talk about that because we've got a lot of things to talk about. Today we want to unpack some of the things that we've spoken about. We always say that this space, Queer Talks, is a space for us to unpack, unlearn, and engage. But even more importantly, unlearn, unpack, and engage honestly. And so in all these things we've spoken about, there are so many nuances in those conversations. And today we want to get into some of those nuances. So let's start here. Identity. There are so many things we didn't mention in our previous video. Let's unpack some of those.
I think one of, I want to say biggest, but one thing that troubles a lot of people in the community, identity-wise, is internalized homophobia.
Let's get into it.
And
Internalized homophobia.
And it might not always be a very in-your-face thing. You know? Some people have just a teaspoon of it, and some people have a whole lot of it.
It becomes a significant part of their identity.
Exactly. But it's a part of navigating those spaces because some of those places have not allowed you respect for being like this, or for identifying this way, or for loving this way. So a tad bit of internalized homophobia creeps up on a lot of us.
This is the thing. Internalized homophobia is a structural, what's the word? It's a structural plague that plagues everybody. We've said that people, regardless of what their conclusion in identity is, some question their identity, right? But in questioning your identity, it becomes hard to question honestly because of this thing. Right? Society doesn't afford people honest space to question their identity. And therefore a lot of us, whether we end up being queer or not, grow up with this internalized homophobia that oftentimes leads to a dishonest but toxic navigation of that identity.
But let me ask this. If we're saying a lot of us grow up with the internalized homophobia, queer or not, does it still make the homophobia internalized if you're not queer?
So the question is
it still internalized homophobia, or is it just homophobia that someone is trying to repress?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. And I think the best answer I can give to it is it's different for different people, right? Because it's different about different honesties, right? So if you're not queer, that's great, that's fine, it's not internalized homophobia. It's just homophobia,
of course,
right? That's what it is. But if I'm saying there are certain things about queerness that I don't want, but I'm still engaging with queer bodies, so sexually. You know what I'm saying? So me and Lo Baba Booty, when there's nobody around us, we're together. But in public, we're not even friends because gay people are not meant to be in my lane. Then it's internalized homophobia.
Very much, very much, very much.
And we tap into this conversation about the different social currencies that these spaces and these navigations come with. Let's talk about it.
I think we've touched on this before in previous videos, where we've spoken about one not owing sexuality to other people. But we also need to be aware that internalized homophobia, as we've mentioned, is a very structural thing, you know. And as Gaho said, awards you, not internalized homophobia, but presenting in a certain way awards you a certain social currency. So the social currency might be straight privilege, which of course awards you other things, safety in certain spaces.
Masked privilege. There's all these different privileges.
A lot of different privileges come in with that. And now we move into people who aren't open about their sexuality. And again, I reiterate the fact that no one owes you their sexuality.
It's people choosing to hide their sexuality.
Yes.
Right.
And again, it's your choice, but you need to really think about why you're making that choice. Because you're comfortable in straight privilege and you don't want to lose it. And in being aware of straight privilege and wanting to keep straight privilege, I feel there is a bit of internalized homophobia that really comes through in that thought process.
There's an issue here, right? when there's no getting concreteness in this identity, because there are people who get punished for being queer.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you toe it ambiguously, and you toe it ambiguously by choice, and you toe it ambiguously because of this internalized thing that you refuse to acknowledge. Because we've already said there's nothing wrong with people who are DL, there's nothing wrong with people who are there, they just, they're not flamboyant like me. But when you choose to tap into this DLness because of this internalized thing, there's a problem there.
Of course. And the most important thing is being ethical. The most important thing is respecting people in every decision. For when you're DL, be DL, but of course respect the people you're involved with.
Exactly.
But again, I will reiterate that the choice to be DL on either side, whether you're a gay man, a queer woman, whatever, the choice to not want to be viewed as a queer person sometimes,
if not most times,
is rooted from a lot of internalized homophobia.
And that internalized homophobia manifests itself into different aspects of life, right? It manifests itself into different navigations. We've spoken about navigating as an honest queer body, right? But there are people who navigate as these bodies and then it ends up being toxic, right? And therefore we lead to bodies being toxically masculine, toxically feminine, toxically queer. People in identities are not exempt from being toxic in those identities, right? And when we speak about nuances, we want to be honest in the conversations we have, right? Internalized homophobia results in a lot of extended trauma for other people.
Yes.
So let's get into that.
Before I go further into it, I just want to jump a little bit back into what we've said.
Let's reverse. We'll get back.
Again, with internalized homophobia is, in life we're aware that there is a very hierarchical thing between femininity and masculinity.
Period.
And it comes through also in masculine women who the internalized homophobia is there, especially when witnessing two masculine women together, and one from the outside would say, well, that's ridiculous, which it of course is, because you're literally in the community.
Exactly.
There is no reason for you to, come with any sort of prejudice. But it also manifests itself in that way, in ways that honestly don't make any sense, moving of course also into transphobia and.
Exactly. Internalized homophobia is a word we all need to unlearn.
Yeah.
Everybody needs to unlearn that internalized homophobia. And when you choose to tap into, you might not be choosing to tap into internalized homophobia, but when you choose to tap into the privilege that comes with not wanting to be labeled as queer, you hurt people in the process.
Of course.
We're speaking about how these hurts lead to different hurts, such as transphobia, such as people not wanting to be with femme bodies, people not wanting to be with queer presenting bodies, whatever that means to you, right? We must talk about those things, because internalized homophobia, because we've moved past the point of it being instilled in what you see to it being a choice.
I'm there, but I'm not there.
Okay.
I'm there, but I'm not there. At some point you can say, you're an adult, you need to heal from this. But another part of me is saying, I've never really had internalized homophobia.
Okay.
But, well, I mean, of course, a lot of people have that teaspoon of it, but I've never had like
the blatant of it, yes.
But I do empathize with the people around me who unfortunately have had to grow in themselves, first being maybe homophobic. And I'm not saying I empathize with homophobes, but I do empathize with people who are really struggling with their identity, and moving through internalized homophobia, which obviously you need to heal from that. You need to fix that.
It's not an easy navigation.
You hurt people around you whilst navigating that. But I don't think it's always 100% a choice.
You're absolutely right. And when we talk about internalized homophobia and we talk about the toxicities in it, right, we need to be honest in how those toxicities manifest themselves into our navigations. But beyond the navigations, the spaces we need to navigate. I want us to talk about gatekeeping, right? Because gatekeeping is a thing that happens in this community. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, the queers.
The queers.
And it really affects me. because especially, and honestly, I don't want to be name dropping cities, but as a resident of the city, I feel like I can name drop.
Stop, Achon. Since the beginning, Butle has been telling us that there are names on this roster. We are at the end of Queer Talks in Ghana. The people want names.
I'm name dropping a city, not people. I told you I'm not messy.
Let's talk cities. You guys can name drop in the comments.
Johannesburg. Queer culture.
Let's get into it.
I think that's why I say queer culture is because I don't think we have a queer community.
Ooh!
We just have queer people,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And of course, people who slander Johannesburg usually aren't from Johannesburg. You guys need to chill.
Okay.
But here I'm specifically speaking about the queer community in Johannesburg, which I feel like is laced with elitism, classism, but it also links to what I said before.
Okay.
If you are a queer person and want to be the only queer person in the room, going to say, and that's a very prevalent thing still now, because I don't know if it's people wanting to be seen as Mboneng, you know, I'm the only one who was able to make it. But of course, navigating queerness again is the more elitist the space is, the more safer you are. Not to say you are safe, but the people around you will not be openly homophobic for social currency.
Ooh.
Therefore, the queers that have access to that space feel they are on a bit of a pedestal, you know.
All of these are toxicities manifesting,
and they've now gatekeep these spaces for, you know, the ones coming after them. And the issue with gatekeeping is no one goes anywhere.
We don't move.
Because whilst you're gatekeeping, you've missed the opportunity to keep walking.
Exactly.
I don't know what's gate.
Exactly. I like this. But very gate.
Oh, busy.
Nobody's getting in. Nobody's progressing.
Exactly.
Right? And therefore, when you hold this gate, wanting to be the only queer person in this space, we're going to get people who say, me being visibly queer, that space has already been taken. The space has already been filled. Let me, you know, because obviously there's more spaces for non-queer bodies.
Of course.
Therefore, let me navigate as a non-queer body. Which leads back into
exactly
what we are saying. The dishonest navigation and the toxic navigation. Because you've moved around the gate to get inside.
And you guys know yourselves.
They know themselves, that's the thing. You've moved in as a non-queer body.
Exactly.
Now you must maintain this internalized homophobia. Now you don't want people who are visibly queer in here because it threatens this image you create. Oh, I love that analogy. And they know themselves. When we talk about gatekeeping, when we talk about let's go here. When we talk about navigating spaces, when we talk about navigating them honestly, it becomes hard when there are people like this in that space who hold the gates.
Of course.
And you said something earlier that, I don't know if you noticed you said it, but we must unpack it.
What did I say?
Just in line. Do we have a community or do we have a culture we share? Because there's a difference. There's a difference. We've spoken about navigating spaces and finding allies in those spaces. Finding people like you in those spaces. But that implies community. Yes. That implies I can walk into a space and know that I'm safe because you're queer and I'm queer. But now I walk into a space and I don't know how it's gonna be because you got in that space before me.
And then also Twitter gate. I had to jump over the gates.
It's compilation of toxicity on toxicity. Do we have a community or do we share a culture?
And I honestly don't want to say, I don't want to make it seem as if no one is, you know, opening and welcoming, because if anything, I got when I needed a shoulder to cry on, when I needed, you know, a space, when I needed, it was always queer people who had me, you know, even like older people that are queer, you know, at some point had my back, you know. So we do have a queer community, but in some places where it matters, where there's capital, a lot of queer people gatekeep those spaces. You know yourselves.
That's what we're saying. You know yourselves. And it's so hard because we've spoken about allyship, right? We've spoken that allies need to be allies absolutely. Allies need to be allies for everybody. But people tend to assume if I'm in a community, then I cannot be toxic to that community, to that identity. And in talking about nuances, we want to talk about you're not exempt from needing to do work just because you live an experience. When we talk about when we talk about a lot, it's a lot. It truly is a lot. And this is gonna be hard. When this clip reaches the internet, this is gonna be hard. Because people know themselves. But we're here now. And we're talking about gatekeeping. Gatekeeping doesn't just happen in spaces as we occupy them, in spaces as we walk into them. Gatekeeping happens in media. We've spoken about internalized homophobia and how it's societal because of how we see it. But things how we see them, media. Let's unpack media, internalized homophobia, media gatekeeping. Aremo.
When we say media, I'm thinking the commercial side of queerness.
Because we've been speaking about social currency.
Of course.
So now we want to link it into a currency that we see that then shapes societal things.
Of course. And if anyone thinks commercial queerness, the first thing you think about is pride. What do you always say? Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it.
Now, pride and if I decide to go at some point, I hope I don't catch hands.
Okay.
But
you're not gonna catch hands.
The fact
because I can try.
Me too.
Purr.
The fact of the matter is, pride now happens in the north part of Johannesburg, and it keeps moving north. And we know what's it called? Spatial what?
The what of the spatials.
Structures. You guys know what I'm talking about. If you did history, you probably know what I'm talking about. The spatial what design of Johannesburg.
Yes.
We understand that the more north you move is where chile day.
How chile day you're also moving away from?
Exactly. And of course, generational wealth in our country isn't always in the favor of black people or people of color. Now, pride, as we know with South African pride, was started by black women and people of color
in the South.
Exactly.
Let's not tiptoe around this. It was not in Sandton.
But it was an accessible place to the people that need to be at Pride.
I want us, before we even get into this, right? The context and the foundation of this is we've spoken about navigating queerness. We speak about it in our experience as black people.
Yes.
Navigating queerness is different for different people. But even more importantly, is different for different races.
Yes.
And so it's important that we have this conversation because the more the space moves away from people like this, the different navigation it becomes. Let's go.
And I mean, that's really the biggest gatekeeping they could have done towards black people. It's not said, we don't want you to come.
Yes.
But I think it's very telling. Why, if we had places sharp, because at some point I think it wasn't brown.
Okay.
If you're saying, okay, safety, cool, then it moved to Rosebank side. It was still a bit of a reach, but it was fine. Then it moved to Melrose. Then it moved to Sandton. And it's just very telling that year after year, you're really communicating that there is a certain group of people that you want less of every single year. I'm not even going to go into headliners. Because
we know.
Yeah.
And you know.
If you know, you know. You see, gatekeeping that happens based on social currency is also dangerous. But this one is worse because this is a safe space that people look forward to year after year. It's the one place that people feel like we're a community.
A community, and we can live our honest truths.
But then it really shows us year after year that there's a separation. And we need you to know. So,
we're talking about gatekeeping in media, right? When we talk about gatekeeping in media, we speak about media spaces such as Pride. But there's media that is not physical, but more like this that you see, right? media, television, movies. We're talking about gatekeeping. And we're talking about our experience as queer bodies. You're queer. I'm queer. We're visible. There are people who are not queer, but we see them on our screens playing your existence.
Hey!
Playing my existence.
Hey, didn't I say this?
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it.
And this one is very personal for me because, of course, I am studying performing arts.
Yes.
How like is for that's acting. Just in case.
Yeah, just in case, you know.
And then a lot of before I even go into auditions, you know,
Okay.
of course, acting is something I've been doing since high school. And in workshops that I've attended, I've often gotten from directors and whatnot that, you know what, maybe if you shift your appearance slightly, you know,
You will get the role.
yeah, you'll get roles and directors will be able to think of casting you and you know, so those are obstacles that I've really, you know, dealt with for quite a few years. Now, you know, I'm in varsity, of course, now we need to, we're no longer looking at just doing acting in school plays or whatnot. You need to get a bag.
Yes.
So of course we attend auditions, we. And still, I spoke to one director who is honestly a director I've wanted to work with for a long time. And he said to me, no, I just think, you know, there's things you must consider. You must consider maybe playing either look into roles into playing a younger guy or shift an appearance or. And I was like, okay, cool. But then I remember watching a show and I was paging through the channels. I'm seeing a masked woman. I'm like, oh my gosh, I never see masked women on South African television.
Let's go.
That's great. And I'm like, let me see who this actress is.
How glad is
cis
social media
heterosexual woman. I said,
playing
perfect.
your existence.
Lovely.
Right?
I even dropped my ring.
Playing your existence.
And I was like, wow. And that unfortunately is the reality of it. Of course, again, yes, it's commercial, but it is also in the social currency side is they want someone to showcase a certain role, you know.
But not have to tackle the truth of that
tackle
role.
the truth of it.
And the truth of that existence.
Exactly, because what I noticed also in watching that role is there's some things that as a queer person I could have said, this is unrealistic, this.
You live that experience before you can tell the story.
So I think it's even better for them to get someone who cannot question them on what they've, you know, the task they've given them.
And that's what gatekeeping does, right? And oftentimes gatekeeping happens by people who are not in this community, right? But want to benefit from the social currency of having the appearance of people in this community in their productions. When we talk about gatekeeping and we talk about media, we talk about there being a social currency to everything really. But the currency value is different for different bodies. And like you've just said now, it is less of a cost to them morally and ethically to have somebody who doesn't live that experience. Because they don't have to tackle the truth of that thing. But then, me on the flip side, as a viewer, that's what I see. And I can go onto social media and see this person not being queer or living this queer truth. Which then again contributes to everything we've been saying.
Yes.
It affects how people see themselves represented and therefore navigate that space. But we're here. There are people who are not queer. There are people playing our existence. You know where I'm going with this. There are people baiting our queerness.
A hot topic.
Let's talk queerbaiting.
Queerbaiting.
What did I say? Let's go.
Where are we starting?
Where do we start?
Queerbaiting has many layers.
Foundations.
We've already spoken social currency.
We have.
And we've spoken about how people who aren't in the community are able to benefit from the ambiguity of people thinking they are, but not being. And I think that's entry level queerbaiting. And unfortunately, a lot of people who queerbait are obviously allowed into queer spaces. And all of a sudden feel like they can be a mouthpiece for queer people. But that's not where I'm going. Sorry. I was just. It was just a
I mean,
thought,
if you want to go there,
it was just a thought.
we can definitely go there. This is the thing. We try concise our episodes so that, you know, we can tackle everything. But this one is big. This one in cool. We're going to have a longer episode than usual. Let's go.
Again, when you've allowed someone into your space, and I will make an example with race.
Okay.
One white boy will say something in Zulu, and all of a sudden he's invited to the bride or whatever.
Exactly.
He can have the land.
Exactly. He can make a whole album in Nguni now. That's not shade. Let's go.
Anyway, the same thing happens with queerbaiters. You know, people who've labeled themselves allies or allies, but also queerbait on the side. You know what I'm saying? Allyship with a teaspoon of queerbaiting, and have been embraced by some queer people into spaces. How gish gish. Now Moto is a mouthpiece for queerness,
but doesn't want to live. Says they don't live that reality.
No, but I can understand not living the reality, but sometimes even it's nonsense.
Chile.
Like,
let's just call it
like, I was trying to
We're
find
trying
a
to
better
find
word.
nice
Like,
ways to put this.
It's just
but it's
absolute
absolute
nonsense.
rubbish.
And yo, wena.
Queerbaiting is real. Queerbaiting exists. You guys are here. We're speaking money, we're speaking chankura dollars, we're speaking social currency. There is this currency that we're mentioning. You don't have to tackle the reality of being queer if you're not queer. But there is a currency to being queer. Because there's a culture that benefits from queerness. The same way there's black culture.
Yes.
And the world wants black culture, but doesn't afford black people the currency of owning their culture. It's the same thing that happens when we talk about queerbaiting.
Well, yeah.
People take over culture that's not theirs, make it their own. Then we get things like e-boys, right? We get things like e-girls.
And I'm not saying don't express yourself in the way you feel comfortable. But like any other culture, when you take from that culture, do it respect. I know homophobic femboys.
That is the one. Accurate. Woo!
I don't know what else anyone can say in that situation. It's just you're literally taking from a culture and then blatantly disrespecting it.
The people in that culture. It's a joke. It's a joke, my darling.
I'm not even gonna start with
Now you have to start.
girlies who apparently invented dressing like a boy.
Oh no, sweetie. Oh no, sweetie. We're not gonna give these people the time of day.
Oh, no, we're not. I'm just saying, like, it
These are the manifestations of these baitings, right?
exactly.
People wanting to Kardashianize queerness. The same way the Kardashianize blackness. Let's call it what it is.
No, but seriously, queer baiting at entry level often leads to that.
Yes.
It often leads to the disrespect of queer people by people who have taken from the culture of queer people.
Don't even walk that reality.
Ooh.
Hey, Khotad. And you're so right, because here is the thing. When we talk about queerbaiting, right, we talk about queerbaiting being this big topic.
Yeah.
But now we're speaking in nuances. And therefore, the nuances of queerbaiting exist in everything we've already spoken about. When we speak about navigating spaces, you could walk into a space thinking somebody is queer, but they're not. And then that affects your navigation. When we talk about episode 3 and we speak about dating, you could think somebody is queer because they like playing with the idea, but they're not. And you're the one with the scar in the end. Queerbaiting is a big topic. But it's a big topic because it exists in every navigation and in every experience. Khotad and khobotlhoko. Khodimakar.
And again, in speaking of people who disrespect your identity, as people who have taken from your identity, is again, it affects how you navigate that space because you're no longer sure.
You're no longer sure. You live this concrete identity.
Exactly.
People live it as a costume.
But
They take it off when they want. Ba ya apara ga ba batle. Wa tlhaloganya?
ha ele bo Spider-Man.
Kitty Spider-Man, who Bruce Wayne Batman.
Yo.
You know what I'm saying? And this is the thing. This episode is definitely longer than the rest have been. But it's because the conversation is more about tackling some of these things that we overlook, but shape very significant parts of our expressions, our navigations of those expressions, our realities of these identities. Queerbaiting exists in gatekeeping. Gatekeeping exists in navigating spaces.
Queerbaiting exists in navigating spaces.
Queerbaiting exists in queer politics. We spoke about that in episode 1.
Queerbaiting exists in everything.
And it is so important for us to want to unpack it. We can't unpack it in a 30-minute episode. We can't unpack everything there is to
I mean,
it.
the bag is still like almost full.
And there's so much more to still be said. The bag is almost full and there's so much more to be said.
That's for you to do.
We have spoken about a lot. We have unpacked a lot. We have journeyed with some of our traumas on this series, right? And this is the thing for me. We started Queer Talks as a pilot experimental space for us and then other queer bodies to interrogate the nuances in our expression and in our identities. Queer space cannot be a space for people to want to find their identity. We can't help people decide if they're queer or not.
Oh yes.
We can't do that. But once they're able to be honest with themselves, we want to offer that space to walk that journey. We want to be honest. There's a lot we've spoken about. Some of it triggering. Some of it requiring of us to put our hearts out there. What do you want to say to the people? Referees, we are done.
Now I want to say, as Gago has said, we cannot tell you if you're gay or not. But what we can do is offer you a hand. In whatever space you're navigating. In whatever you're experiencing. In making sure you don't start your journey with pedophiles.
Exactly! In making sure that you know how to navigate the space honestly.
In making sure that when you do make it, because
Period.
that you're not gatekeeping.
That you're not gate-kept. And that you're not with people who want to be the only people in that space.
Exactly.
We're here to walk hand in hand with you on that journey.
Make sure you're not blindsided.
What halokan? It is a lot. It's a lot. And there's so much more that there is to unpack. In our first episode, we said we don't know where this will go. We said we don't know if we'll invite other people. We said we don't know if we'll have a panel. But the hope is endless. This could go wherever it needs to go. Because this is for us, by us, for us. Hey! That's all. Is that our slogan?
What's the slogan?
Get a slogan. TM trademark vocabulary. But I think queerbaiting, man, it's so big. It's so big.
And it's so itchy.
We're thinking,
It's itchy.
but we can't. We need you guys to unpack certain things alone. Right? And we can definitely talk about it. More, DM, do something, but DM with money. Remember what we said. And
Can I go?
but that's enough for this video. And like we always say, remember, be a bad bitch.
And don't suck the dick.
Boom. And if you suck the dick, we're not judging you.
We're
Where are
not.
we? Find that in the next episode. And in this video, there's a lot that we want to unpack. This fucking fly.
And it's like in the camera. Yo. Word.
I just forgot one word.
Referees, we are done. I love you. I appreciate you. I support them. Support us too. And be a bad bitch. Always. Bye y'all.